Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. I'm Dr. Daniel Amen.
And I'm Tana Amen. Here we teach you how to win the fight for your brain to defeat anxiety, depression, memory loss, ADHD, and addictions.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is brought to you by Amen Clinics, where we've transformed lives for 3 decades using brain SPECT imaging to better target treatment and natural ways to heal the brain. For more information, visit amenclinics.com.
The Brain Warriors Way podcast is also brought to you by BrainMD, where we produce the highest quality nutraceutical products to support the health of your brain and body. For more information, visit brainmdhealth.com. Welcome to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. So today we're going to talk about oral contraceptives. Do oral contraceptives increase your risk of suicide? Ouch. But before we get into that, I want to read something. We actually welcome your reviews and your testimonials if you are willing to leave them for us, because they're so cool. We actually read them. We've got one here that I love. So, hooked and growing because of it. This is from Corporate Cowboy. I'm hooked on your podcast, and the information it contains is helping me grow as a person and is improving my health and those around me. Thank you for being so steadfast in your approach and beliefs. I've purchased Change Your Brain and ordered the Brain Warriors Way book and cookbook. Keep challenging us to do better to ourselves and those we care about. Love that.
Thank you so much.
So thank you. Keep sending those to us. They're like a little dopamine burst for us. So we love that. Now let's talk about this, because you've mentioned this before. I've heard you talk about how oral contraceptives actually cut your serotonin, and in women we already have less serotonin.
And according to one study, 52% less serotonin. And serotonin is the neurotransmitter that helps people feel happy. It manages their cravings. It's involved in social reactions, also involved in pain. And when serotonin levels go low, the emotional brain fires up, making women particularly more vulnerable to anxiety, depression, worry, holding grudges. Things don't go their way. They get upset. They can be just a bit argumentative and oppositional, and see too many errors in themselves and their spouses.
So this is interesting. This study was published November 17th in the American Journal of Psychiatry. And it's a big study. It's a Danish study. It was nearly 500,000 women followed for an average of 8.3 years. This was a big study. And the mean age was 21 years old. And there were nearly 7,000 first suicide attempts and 71 suicides that were identified throughout the study. So this was a big study, and what I thought was really interesting, so here's what they said. Women who use hormonal contraceptives are at an increased risk for suicide attempt, and suicide. The highest relative risk is seen in adolescent women. So that's really interesting. We need to pay attention to that when we put young girls on birth control, not just because they're becoming sexually active, but so often it's because of their skin or because they've got polycystic ovarian syndrome. That is not the cure for polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's just a Band-Aid. So that's one thing. Also, it says that it increases risk of depression, which you just talked about. And then they actually go on to say that doctors should be more careful when prescribing hormonal contraception, because they're not determining whether women have an underlying depression in advance. And that's really important to identify. You've often said that, this is a problem. So what do you think about that?
That dovetails with another study that was recently published of 20% of teenage girls are depressed.
Right.
So
they're already struggling because their hormones are raging.
An epidemic in this country of mental health problems.
Right.
23% of women between the ages of 20 and 60 are taking antidepressant medication. And it's like, why? And birth control pills could be one of the reasons why mood disorders have skyrocketed. So if they change your hormones and increase the risk of depression. Now, what do? You don't throw away your birth control pills.
No, we need to talk about that.
There are natural ways to increase serotonin, and exercise is one. a certain dietary combination. If you have foods that have protein that actually has a lot of tryptophan, and you mix it with healthy carbohydrates like sweet potatoes, it's another way. People go on a low-carb diet actually have a higher incidence of depression because that diet really depletes serotonin in the brain.
But so, I mean, it's really important because this is a complicated issue. If you are sexually active and you're not wanting to have children, right? We have to pay attention to this. Then there are lots of different birth control options, but understanding your hormonal balance and whether you have depression and what other options are available, and this is outside of my scope of practice, I mean, for sure. But I know that, I mean, if it were me, if you're really that depressed and you get depressed because of birth control pills, it's certainly not going to help your libido at all or your love life. So probably a good idea to go and find out what other options there are and get a thorough assessment with someone who really knows what they're doing and find out, what else you could be doing. Birth control pills also deplete B vitamins drastically. So that's another thing you could do is be taking some B vitamins, complex B.
And magnesium, because birth control pills also
Right.
deplete magnesium. So if you're on birth control pills, other ways to increase serotonin can be really helpful. And then the natural treatments for depression, which are omega-3 fatty acids, higher in EPA than DHA. I think everybody should, I like the blend that we have with omega-3 power, which is 60% EPA, 40% DHA, and I did that purposefully because the studies show more EPA tends to help focus and mood, more DHA, more for memory and anxiety. But multiple vitamin for the B vitamins, omega-3 fatty acids, optimize your vitamin D level. I say that over and over and over again. Exercise, learning to kill the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that come into your mind. And all of these treatments have been found head-to-head against antidepressants to be equally effective, but they have no side effects. And then if you noticed that after you started birth control pills that you became depressed, you should stop them.
So pay attention.
And you should talk to your doctor about other ways to not have a baby.
Right.
And I think that's really important. Now, there are natural treatments for depression like St. John's wort, but St. John's wort's actually been found to decrease the effectiveness
Be careful.
of birth control pills. I'm at the University of Washington doing a book signing, and I saw in their bookstore cafe, they had shakes, and they had a St. John's wort shake. And I'm like, oh, great, someone's feeling depressed. They get a St. John's wort shake, and now all of a sudden they're pregnant, even though they don't want to be. They're going to get more depressed, not less depressed.
Right. So interesting. So just be aware and also be aware that there are different ways that birth controls are made up of different hormonal balances. So make sure you're just getting checked. You go to someone who knows what they're talking about. Pay attention to what your moods are like.
So I wonder in the study if they looked at IUDs.
I don't think they did. I think this was just birth control pills because it was about hormones.
And you and I know this really well, that hormones are so connected to brain health. We think of hormones like Miracle-Gro for the brain.
Right.
And
this was hormonal contraceptives.
Right. So it's estrogen, progesterone, ways to alter a woman's cycle. But whenever you mess with hormones, you mess with someone's ability to feel happy, to feel rational. And you were telling me the other day about, so when a woman starts having her period, that it actually begins to remodel her brain, especially after she has a baby.
So there are 3 stages. So when she goes through, adolescence, right? When she, her hormones shift and she becomes a woman. But then when you have a baby, I mean, those people who have children probably know what I'm talking about, women who have children, you never sleep quite the same again, right? So your brain literally rewires itself. You get this mommy brain, and everything becomes about protecting your nest. You're willing to put up with more than you would normally put up with in order to keep your family together. You're
willing to put up more with me? Is that
with
what you're
in
saying?
general, yes. Unfortunately, with you, I don't have to. That's a good thing, because you're great. But most women do. They end up putting up with a lot of things they might not, because the focus, it's not conscious. It's just, that's the focus. That's the drive, is to keep their nest together, right? It's a nesting thing. It's a family, like her whole focus is on keeping her family safe and secure and together. And then when she goes through menopause, big study was done, and this is really interesting. And part of it was discovered because a lot of people thought that, midlife crisis, more men are filing for divorce. Turns out it's not the men. It was the women, more women.
70% of the time.
Right. It's women during that hormonal shift, like during that menopausal age or midlife crisis age, that are filing for divorce. And so you're like, well, why? Is it because men are cheating? Nope. Men don't really want their families to fall apart. Even if they did, it's often they don't want their families to fall apart. What ends up happening is a woman's brain rewires again. So she went through mommy brain, and then when she goes through menopause, it rewires again. What mommy brain is that she gets more estrogen, right? So she estrogenizes her brain. So that's that, I'm going to keep everything together, I'm nesting, that's that feminizing type of reaction. Makes her very protective of her nest. Then all of a sudden, when she goes through menopause, she rewires again, and she's like, okay, I'm done. Like estrogen drops low, testosterone goes really high. Well, it's not that it goes higher, it becomes more dominant because the other hormones drop lower, right? So she's now more testosterone dominant, and everything that's been bothering her kids are gone, her kids leave the nest, and she's like, I'm done. It's all about me. Like, she's just like, done.
Are you saying this is what I have to look forward to?
I hope not, because I think, here's the thing, I often say that like progesterone is the reason I'm not on the evening news. So, I mean, I'm willing to I don't want that to happen to my family. So, know better, do better. So I'm aware, I pay attention, and I stay aware.
That's why we do the Brain Warriors Way podcast, to let you know what's in store for you, because it's a war.
Exactly.
And you want to be armed, prepared, and aware. Stay with us.
So we're back, and we're going to talk about PTSD in the brain today. Really quickly, I want to read this because I love this. Wellness Coach's new fave. So it says, I love sharing these podcasts with my clients, as they are short, to the point, and touch on such a variety of issues: parenting, CBT, marriage, fitness, etc. Thank you. I can't wait to read and then probably share your new children's book. The new children's book is awesome, by the way.
Captain Snout and the Superpower Questions.
Really cute.
Yeah, I love the stories of parents and grandparents saying that the kids know all the words, and when they try to skip a page to get the kid to bed, they're like, no.
Who was it? Somebody just said recently, please don't bring any more of Dr. Amen's books into the house, because they can't because they're not short enough, and they can't get away with not reading every single page. It was hilarious. So it was very, very funny. So I love that. So let's talk about PTSD. So first of all, we should talk about, a lot of people think PTSD is just for soldiers, or it's just for people who have been through a war, but it's really for a lot of different types of wars. So let's tell people what that's about.
So I published a big study in 2015 on 21,000 people, showing we could separate PTSD in the brain from people who had traumatic brain injury, so emotional trauma from physical trauma, with high levels of accuracy with SPECT.
So the problem there is because they would treat them the same, right? Because the symptoms were often the same.
The symptoms overlap significantly. And if you treat people with PTSD like they had traumatic brain injury, you'll actually ruin them, and vice versa.
So that happened with Denny recently.
Which we should talk about. We're going to have Denny on the show.
We're going to have him on the show.
So it was many years ago, after I started doing his scans, that my assistant, who'd actually been traumatized, she noticed the diamond pattern in the brain. And she said, when people have this pattern, that's the cingulate is lit up, the top point of the diamond, their basal ganglia, the side points, the thalamus, the bottom point. When that's lit up, just ask them if they have trauma. And I remember my first case, he had the diamond pattern, and I said, well, have you ever had trauma? And he said, emotional trauma. And he said, no. And I learned from people with brain injuries, you couldn't ask once. You had to ask them like 10 times. You ever fall out of a tree, off a fence, dive into a shallow pool, in a car accident, sports concussion, whatever. And just like I did with you.
Right.
And so I started asking him, well, have you ever been robbed, raped, in a fire? No. Did you ever have a time when you thought you were going to lose your life? And he said, no. And then he said, yes. And I said, what happened? He said, I was 10 years old. It was in the San Fernando Valley, where we're going to put a new clinic. I'm so excited about that, in Encino, which is where I grew up. And in Encino, there are a lot of movie stars live there. And one of his friends was the child of a movie star who collected exotic animals.
Oh.
And he said, I went over his house. They had a lion. The lion got loose while I was there and actually had me pinned.
Oh my gosh.
And they shot the lion when the lion was on top of me.
Oh my God.
I looked at him and I went, how did you forget that? Because
That's
that actually
crazy.
seems pretty intense.
Traumatic, yeah.
And he had nightmares for a long time.
Okay,
about
so in defense of this guy,
that.
so I think it's a defense mechanism that we use to stay sane.
It's called repression.
Right. When we go in, when you come from an environment that's a little wacky, I call it garden variety dysfunctional. Call it what you want. But I think that we do that to normalize and be able to like survive and function. Because I remember when I first met you, you were like, we were talking to me about some of my physical issues. Was really sick as a kid. Like I was like, not kidding, kind of like sick all the time as a kid, and had like not normal stuff. Like I had upper and lower GIs when I was 4 years old. And so the first thing you did is start asking me, well, what happened when you were 4? And I'm like, oh my gosh, don't start shrinking me. And so I'm like, nothing happened when I was 4 years old. I was fine. I wasn't raped. I wasn't molested. I wasn't like, and so you're like, okay. And so anyways, we were just talking for a little while and all of a sudden it comes out. And I didn't even like connect the two, but we were talking a little while later and I started telling you about when my uncle was murdered in a drug deal. And the police came to the door, and I remember the whole thing, my mom screaming and my grandmother screaming, and they both fell to the floor. And I was completely freaked out. And my other uncle was a heroin addict, and his friends were there, and he was just a mess. And I mean, the whole thing was just, it was horrifying, right? And I was just sort of disappeared into, like, no one was there to sort of take care of me. And then 2 weeks later, I ended up with these upper and lower GIs. And you just kind of looked at me and you're like, and you don't think there's any connection? And that's just like one of like many stories. But the way I often described it growing up was that there was like, it's always like there was a tiger around the corner. You kind of never knew when something was going to happen. I remember one of my early memories was my mom and I coming home from the movies, which we didn't get to do very often, but we went to the movies and we came home and there was someone in our house, like robbing our house. We had a burglar in our house. My mom grabs a shotgun and chases the guy through the house. And she shoots the shotgun out the back window. Who does that? Nobody shoots a shotgun out the back window. You know, and she's like, well, I wasn't actually aiming it at him. I was shooting it into this flower bed just to scare him. And I'm like, now, as I'm older, I'm like, you can't do that.
You're actually still reacting to it.
Okay, well, anyways, so you know, like life was always just sort of like, what's going to happen next? You know, there's this tiger around the corner and, you know, what's going to happen next? So it was always just...
So, and that can happen with one big event, like hearing about your uncle being murdered and witnessing what happened with your mom and grandmother. Or it can happen with hundreds of small events. So when I was little, because my bladder wasn't developing properly, I wet my bed probably till I was like 9 years old. And what that meant is I woke up every morning panicked.
And that's hard, especially when you have siblings.
Because, you just never knew. And nobody was terrible to me. And my mom was great. But it's to be embarrassed
Right.
every day of your life, just not knowing. So what it does is it changes your nervous system to heighten it, to always watch for what is that next bad thing.
Right.
That is going to happen. So
So
it can be a big thing or something that many people would think of not that big. I mean, I would think of it as big, which is why I'm really great at treating kids who have enuresis.
But I still notice I still am looking for the bad thing. Like I'm still like, we're walking and I notice if someone's drunk, if they're following someone. I mean, I notice someone who looks like wrong to me. Like
Right.
I notice everything wrong.
One of the things that happened to us last year is we were walking Aslan, our white German Shepherd, on Corona del Mar beach. So Corona del Mar is one of the ritziest places in the world. But on the beach, sometimes there's
At night,
a little
right.
bit of a seedy element. And, my favorite place to walk is right on the jetty, right next to the water.
So you started talking about it, my heart started beating faster.
And, as we go back, it's a little dark, and you go, let's turn around. And I'm like, no, let's go to the end.
I don't want to go to the end.
And you were right, I was wrong. And two pit bulls.
They were fighting dogs.
Came and attacked our dog. And
And one of them bit you.
I got bit in the process. And
I almost went to jail because I went psycho. When I get scared, this psycho person comes out of me that's not human. So that's like the whole mama bear on steroids thing. I went completely insane.
with his gangbangers all tatted up.
And I didn't care. And I could tell I was like, I had an out-of-body
I'm
experience.
trying to calm her down.
No, there was no calming me down. And I'm having this out-of-body experience going, I know I should probably not be saying what I'm saying to this guy. And it didn't matter. I couldn't shut myself up. But what happened was I got triggered. And then recently, some lady wasn't controlling her dog, another pit bull, and she wasn't controlling him, and he almost bit my dog, but it wasn't nearly as extreme as that situation where we actually got attacked. And I lost my mind, and I was not nice to her, not even a little bit.
Okay.
So
the past is always living in the present. And if that's you, because 30 million people grew up in alcoholic homes in the United States. PTSD affects about 7% of the population. And the next podcast, we're going to talk about
But I want to add...
Wait. We're going to talk about post-traumatic growth. This one, we're going to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. And people who have PTSD, the symptoms are often flashbacks.
Okay,
Of the
so
event. Nightmares. They can have panic attacks. Sometimes they
can you get
feel
triggered really
like
easily?
their
Like
future is shortened.
okay,
They may feel numb. Yes, they can be easily triggered. If anything like what happened in the past, and the brain is a sneaky organ. The brain works through association. So if you were attacked in a park, sometimes just being in another park, you'll start feeling panicky. If it was storming out, sometimes just a storm will trigger the panic. If you were at a place and you smelled gardenias, and all of a sudden the smell of gardenia is now associated with the trauma. So it can be anything that's related to the trauma.
So let me connect this because I've heard other people say this. So I'm thinking if someone's had PTSD, they're experiencing the same thing. So I was attacked when I was 15 by a person who tried to rape me, and I got away. I never connected that to the dog attack. However, I actually did some NLP on this because I was so triggered. I couldn't talk about it without shaking.
Neurolinguistic programming.
Yes, neurolinguistic. But I couldn't talk about it without shaking and like getting so wound up. So I did some NLP with it to help to sort of dilute that feeling and like take that trigger away. And it helped a lot. And it was during that time that I put together that my reaction was exactly this. The only time I've ever felt that same way was when I got attacked when I was 15. And then again, when the dog almost bit Aslan on the beach, that next time, how long did it take me? It took me 10 minutes to calm down. And I went off on that lady because when I get scared, that's my reaction. My reaction is to go crazy. So I went off on her and I'm shaking. So that reaction, I noticed a pattern. I have that reaction every time.
Yeah, no, there's actually a technique in hypnosis, which I'm a huge fan of, called hypnoanalysis, where you go back to the trauma, you remember what you were thinking and feeling, and then you go back, you actually regress them to the first time in their life where they were thinking or feeling that. I treated a 16-year-old boy, maybe I haven't told you the story. He had panic attacks. And so I put him in a trance, and last panic attack, what were you thinking or feeling? I can't breathe. I'm like, okay, think of yourself getting younger and smaller and younger, to the first time in your life when you couldn't breathe. And he went back to when he was 4 years old, and he had a piece of steak stuck in his throat, and someone had to do the Heimlich maneuver. But whenever you go back to the first event, you want to make sure it's actually the first event.
Right.
And so after we cleared that out, you can breathe, you're healthy, you're grateful because someone was there to help you. You don't need to be anxious and nervous about that anymore. So you clean that out, and then you go, now I want you to get smaller and younger. And is there any other time in your life when you couldn't breathe? His mother's in the room. And he starts choking. And he says, it's dark. And it's wet. And I'm going to die because I can't breathe. He was born with the cord wrapped around his neck.
Oh my gosh.
And his mother starts crying because that's exactly what happened. And even though he didn't have language then, there was part of his soul that remembered it. So that
the trauma state.
When he was 4 and he couldn't breathe again, that reinforced the trauma. Right. Triggered again when he was 16 and he started having panic attacks. And after that hypnosis session, he never had a panic attack.
That's very similar to what they did in NLP with me. It's not the same, but it's a similar type of technique where you go back and you sort of clean up what happened in the past.
Isn't that interesting?
Really interesting. So I like that.
He was such a special kid. And, you know, I saw him 3 times, and he was better.
I like it.
So lots to do. If you've had trauma in your life, we're both huge fans of NLP. We're huge fans of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, tapping, havening. Mm-hmm. You can learn all about those, you know, if you Google them. But there's so much help. And you want to talk about Denny just
Yeah, so Denny he was a Marine, and I actually met him when I went on a survival training weekend with my daughter.
Because they've been assaulted.
Yes, I'm telling you, this is not, I have 11 cameras around my house.
So this is how PTSD comes around.
But my way of dealing with it is to be a fighter. My way of dealing with it.
We're going to talk about that next,
right.
under PostTraumatic Growth.
So anyways, I take my daughter on this survival weekend where you have to basically survive with nothing. It was not easy. Anyways, you have to learn how to do it with everything with nothing. So this kid, to me, he's a kid. He's not a kid, but he's like a kid to me. He was one of the lead instructors, and he's an ex-Marine, and he tells his story, and it breaks my heart. So he's this Marine who tried to commit suicide. Actually, it was just a horrible story. Was he in Iraq or Afghanistan?
Iraq, I think.
Iraq, okay. Anyways, he was in a vehicle that was blown up, and 2 of his friends with him died in front of his eyes. You know, he's trying to help save one of them, and he died in front of his eyes. He had a massive head injury, and one of his friends survived and lost a limb or something like this, but he had this huge injury. So he's in the hospital. He goes through hell with the whole VA treatment. He ends up almost dying. Then when he finally comes to, he ends up trying to kill himself because he's on the wrong treatment, right? So it's exactly what you talked about, not knowing the difference between head injury and PTSD.
And he had both.
And he had both, severe. and he's had 12 concussions throughout his life, and it's just a really sad story. So I hear his story and I'm like, okay, you gotta come see us. And he's just the nicest kid. So he comes and sees you.
He had severe brain trauma, and he was on the wrong medication, the wrong treatment. And when we helped to balance his brain, what did he say?
Well, it was pretty crazy because I'm following this kid, so I want to make sure he doesn't fall through the cracks again. So I keep sort of hounding him. I can be that way. I can be sort of a nag. And so I'm following up with him. I'm following up with him because I didn't hear from him. Yeah. And so I'm not hearing from him. I'm not afraid of a Marine. Just kidding. So
you're afraid of a psychiatrist.
Yeah, but Marines are a little different. So anyway, so I'm following up with this kid. See, you can see through us, and I don't like that. So I'm following up with this kid, and he's like, well, I haven't written back. He's like, basically, he was like, it's only been less than 2 weeks, and my diet's better, I'm sleeping better, my thoughts are better, my memory's better. I'm like, wow, this is pretty crazy. He just that quickly started to feel so much better. And he's got hope again.
That's how people feel better fast. It's not take this drug and hope you feel better fast. It's you get brain healthy habits into your life so your brain can help heal. You have to put the brain in a healing environment.
Well, when we open the next one, I want to start with I'll read what he actually said, and then we can talk about growth.
Great. All right, stay with us. Post-traumatic growth coming up. Welcome back. So we just finished talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. Now we're going to talk about post-traumatic growth. So I gave 5 talks last week at the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference. And while I was there, I attended a lot of other lectures and went to a lecture by Marty Seligman, who is what most people think of as the father of positive psychology.
Interesting.
And he worked a lot with the military. And he said, you have to think of PTSD on a bell-shaped curve. That people toward one end, maybe 10% of people that experience traumatic events end up with post-traumatic stress disorder. So really have significant psychological problems. And then there's most people, but people don't talk about what happens on the other end of the bell-shaped curve, that it's actually post-traumatic growth.
See, I love that idea.
That these are people, because of the trauma, have used it in a way to make their lives significantly better. And I actually think of that with you, that you grew up in a very chaotic, traumatic situation. And yes, it had a negative fallout for you. But you have spent so much of your life helping people who have suffered that you're really a better person and the world is better because of what you experienced.
Oh, thank you. Well, I actually love the concept of that there's this idea or possibility that you can grow and become better after trauma, because the idea of being a victim, to me, I've said this in other podcasts, it's repulsive. Like I don't like it. It's scary to me. And when I get scared, I'm not that nice. So it's this idea that you can do something, and you often make fun of me and you tease me because I still practice karate and I love it. It's my favorite thing. Learning how to sort of stay strong and that fighting mentality, and also going on survival weekends with my daughter. But it's a mindset. It's not just because I'm crazy. It's because don't look at me like that. It's because it's a mindset.
No, you qualified it. It's not just because you're crazy. You qualified it.
No, it's a mindset. For me, it is, I'm doing something empowering. Does that make sense? So I love this idea that I'm doing something empowering. And so do I need to? I live in Newport, probably not, but it's, I like it So it makes me feel secure. And so it makes me feel safer. I like it. And it's learning something new.
So it's taking the bad thing that happened and turning it into a skill,
Right.
or a set of skills that not only help you but help other people.
Right. I love it. So we ended the last podcast that we did on PTSD with the story of Denny. And I just want to open it with his actual testimonial because I sort of did an overview. This is what he said. He came and got scanned, and he said, "It's only been a week and I can already feel a difference. Since the scan, I've increased my activity level, fitness, I've modified my diet, and most importantly, I've maintained for a week the vitamin regimen. I feel sharper in my responses, and I am more active in my everyday activities. I feel less pain." We talked about that also in a previous one. "Less pain from inflammation as well. It's been a much needed redirect. I'm very thankful for the support." And then he goes on to say, "I'm doing great. My energy level and attention span has increased, allowing me to focus more. As a result, I've been more active and outdoors every day. Since I started adjusting my habits, it seems I've gotten more happy and positive. I really want for my brain to have an improvement that can be visible on my scan. That motivation is what's gotten me back to normal." So he's a little competitive. He's a Marine, right? So he's a little competitive. So, but it was only a week, and he once he could see, and his response was so cool when he was here. He's like, I knew it. He's like, I just knew there was something not right. I knew that there was something missing. And being able to see it made a difference for him. It got him motivated to do the right thing.
And you did on your page, didn't you do
a live chat?
It's on your page?
Yeah. And what I want to do, though, is have something more in depth. I want to have him on as a guest onto our podcast where we can go more in depth. So.
All right. So who develops post-traumatic
growth
stress disorder versus post-traumatic growth?
Right.
And my goodness, it's 1982. And I don't know that you know this. I was an intern at Walter Reed, and there was a writing contest with the Baltimore, D.C. Institute for Psychoanalysis. And when psychoanalysis was still big. And so I entered the contest, and I wrote an essay called Post-Vietnam Stress Disorder, a metaphor for current and past life events.
Oh, interesting.
And what I argued is the people who come out of war with PTSD often went into war with stress.
Interesting.
And with trauma. And now what I would say is they often went in with vulnerable brains.
That's fascinating. So people can experience the same thing, but if they had more brain reserve, or if they had more purpose even going in, they didn't feel as vulnerable, or they didn't have as much trouble with their brains going in, they came out better.
Right. So we should talk about brain reserve. Brain reserve is the extra tissue you have to deal with whatever stress comes your way. And when you're born, if your mom was good to you when she was having you, and even before, and that's a big if, because a lot of people, you go, well, did you drink when you were pregnant with her? They'll go, oh no, as soon as I found out, I stopped.
But those first 2 months are critical.
But the first 2 months, and often if you're drinking or using drugs, you don't discover it for 6 or 8 weeks. And when does the brain start forming? Week 3. And so there are a lot of people who have less reserve.
Well, and 50 years ago, they didn't think a little bit of alcohol and smoking was that bad.
That's right. My mom smoked.
Mine did too.
Which was not a good thing. And, and I'm not bitter. It's just
they just didn't know.
And so brain reserve is the extra tissue you have to deal with whatever stress comes your way. And So if your mom was good to herself and good to you when she was pregnant with you, if you were fed well, if they didn't let you play contact sports, if you didn't think of alcohol as a health food, I mean, all of these things can steal your reserve, because you have to ask yourself, put two people in a tank, expose them to the same blast, at the same angle, the same force. One of them walks away unharmed, the other one's permanently disabled. Why? And it has to do with the level of brain function they actually brought into the accident. And it's not just brain function, it's the four circles. It's the level of health within the four circles that determines who grows from that experience and who suffers. And one of my best examples, I love this child. His name is Chris. He's 12.
Oh, this is a good story.
He wasn't 12. He was 16.
16, yeah.
Yeah, and he was born without a left jaw.
It's an amazing story.
And it's called Golden Harse, HARSE syndrome. And I saw him because he started having panic attacks. And, well, why are you having panic attacks? In order to fix his face, he had 20 surgeries, 20 reconstructive surgeries. And on the last one, they had problems with the intubation, and he started hyperventilating. And now whenever he thought of a new surgery, he would hyperventilate. And so they brought him to see me. One session of hypnosis fixed the anxiety. It was really awesome. But I kept seeing him because I had never met a healthier human being in my life. You know,
That's
his
amazing.
face looks like a railroad yard, and straight A's in school. He's got a girlfriend. He's president of his class. He's optimistic.
I love
He
that.
has goals. And
You should make a movie about that.
I have to understand why is he that way. And he was that way because his mom never let his disability
Right.
be an excuse
See,
for
first
him
of all, I hate that word.
not to do his homework, not to take out the trash, not to be kind and nice to people. So his mother was massively important. And plus, he was an optimist. His glass was always half full rather than half empty. He said, well, I don't have cancer. I don't have anything that's going to kill me. Yes, I look different, but I think I look pretty good.
It's like you. You're like that. You're so funny.
I look different, but I'm cool. I got you. So, I mean, I'm like, there's no discussion on if I'm not good looking enough.
That's a great story.
I have
And,
you.
you know, the word disability has always bothered me a little bit. It's like it's a challenge. It's like, why is that a disability? It just bothers me that we do that in society. I mean, we do it because we need something to say. We have to have a label somehow.
So there's psychological traits of post-traumatic growth, and optimism is one. Now, not blind optimism, but optimism is really important. Your attitude and gratitude and appreciation and counting your blessings versus counting your curses. Really important to how you feel. And then there are social influences to post-traumatic growth. His mom, I mean, hugely supportive, but also she's not taking any grief from him. She expects him to perform at a high level way. And there are spiritual influences. I am here for a reason. That his life had meaning and purpose.
That's awesome. That's a great story.
And I think for you, you have post-traumatic growth. Why do you think so?
My mom. If I had to narrow it, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think
Well,
by
you had
nature,
a good enough brain that I decided to marry you, so that's one. So there's some biology.
yeah, probably. But I mean, I think, you know, I think part of it is maybe there's something hardwired. I'm not 100% sure. But I do know that my mom is a fighter. I mean, she's a fighter because I know like there are just people in my family who didn't end up sort of the same way, even though they share my genes, because they grew up in an environment with parents who weren't. They gave up. they had more of a victim mentality. They were
And that's never
No.
You are not a victim. And you're a learner.
right.
You
Love to learn.
learning.
Yeah.
And so
But that was
one of
my
the
mom.
reasons I fell in love with you is that you're curious and you explore and you seek answers.
But my mom was successful. She defied all of the odds. She was a 16-year-old runaway. She didn't finish high school, and she's wildly successful. It wasn't easy.
And she has post-traumatic growth too.
Right. And I think that that's a big part of it. I was
And
close
you've
to my
always
mom.
had a sense of meaning and purpose.
Right.
That life just isn't about you, that you're here on the planet to do something good for a lot of people.
Right.
Stay with us. Thank you for listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Go to iTunes and leave a review, and you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to get a free signed copy of the Brain Warriors Way and the Brain Warriors Way cookbook we give away every month.